Okay, good morning. We're going to call this session of the City of Kenmore Hearing Examiner to order. We have on the agenda today an appeal that was filed by Mr. George Sharaway, and we're here to hear that appeal, an open record appeal proceeding that's governed by the Kenmore Municipal Code. Kenmore Municipal Code has detailed information on the procedures that must be followed in a case such as this. It is a contested case. The appellant had the opportunity to choose contested case or mitigated case. This is a contested case hearing. In part, that means that the city has the responsibility to show by a preponderance of evidence that violations have occurred, in which case the city will have now the obligation to move forward with its presentation of evidence, and then the appellant will be able to respond to the evidence presented. I received in advance of the hearing identification of exhibits and witnesses. I thank the attorneys for complying with that pre-hearing order. That also helps govern the procedures we'll follow at this hearing today. So I'm ready to listen, ready to begin the hearing, and we turn to the city attorney then for presentation of the city's case.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. I think if allowed, we'd like to go through some preliminary matters first.
Certainly. This
you.
is Don Raton, who's city attorney here today.
Correct. Thank you again. Well, first, the city did submit some documents yesterday, but I think I'm going to ask Mr. Sharaway to go ahead. He identified that he'd like to make a request of the hearing examiner at the outset prior to the beginning of testimony, and I was hoping he'd have that opportunity.
First, I want to begin with thank you so much for taking the time to meet up with us today. And I believe, as you know, my first attorney, she withdrew from the case. And the second attorney, she came into this case to review documents and find out all the findings and everything that's related to the case. And
okay, you are Mr. Sharaway?
Yes, yes, sir. I'm sorry,
okay.
George Sharaway.
George Sharaway, for the record. And do you have a preliminary matter you want to raise, or are you going to begin testimony?
I'd like to, again, ask for extension based on records that was just submitted last night at 6 p.m. that I did not have. And I don't have time to look at 700 pages, and every Dropbox have another 200 pages, which this is all related to my case to be able to represent myself or have an attorney represent me, and my attorney is not present.
Why isn't your attorney present? They responded to the pre-hearing order.
I believe she asked for 2 extensions, and she was denied both times, and I believe the city attorney didn't have a problem with the extension, and based on her being out of town, and this is something I tried to get another attorney to represent me, but no one would take the case since it's not.
So you're here this morning asking for a continuance of this hearing, is that correct?
Yes, please.
And the reason you're asking it for a continuance is because you just received documents last night at 6 p.m.?
Yes, I have records that I got last night.
You're holding up in your hand what looks like to be, what, a dozen pages of material?
Sir, it's more like every Dropbox have more like 1,000 pages, and every
so you're holding in your hand emails from the city, is that correct?
Yes.
And they identify that there would be documents available for your review in a Dropbox location.
And it is.
And you're representing that you have not had time to look at those, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
That's the basis for your request for a continuance.
And my attorney is not here also.
And your attorney's not here?
Yes, sir.
When did you learn of that your attorney would not be present?
I learned of that, I can't give you an exact date, but it's approximately about 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm. And who did you retain as your legal counsel? As your attorney?
Claudia Newman.
Okay, an individual, or is she part of a law firm?
She's a part of a law firm.
Okay, thank you. City, have any response to this request for continuance from Mr. Sharaway?
Yes, we do. The city does not have an objection and would be in agreement to extend this. I would ask the hearing examiner to look at the Kenmore Municipal Code section 19.30.100. Subsection A talks about expeditious processing of appeals, gives time periods, but it then also provides when reasonably necessary to enable the attendance of all necessary parties at the hearing or the production of evidence or to otherwise assure that due process is afforded, time periods may be extended upon the agreement of the parties. It is my understanding, I will confirm, that the public records official for the city submitted additional installments to Mr. Sharaway's public records requests last night via email. I believe the timing, there were 1, 2, or 3 responses to him between the timing of 5 p.m. and 6 or 6:30, and that the 5th installment did include a Dropbox. I myself didn't look into the Dropbox, so I don't know the volume. And I do have a concern about him not having enough time to review those records. I also have a concern that Ms. Newman is not here. But because of that, we would request an extension beyond the timeline noted in the code. And if Mr. Sharaway's is in agreement to extend that, I'd ask that he put that on the record.
Give me that last part again. Put what on the record?
So we can extend beyond the code period if there is an agreement by both parties. That's subsection B of 19.30.100. The city is in agreement to extend beyond the period identified in the code so that he has the opportunity to review those documents and that he has counsel.
Is the city ready to proceed with the presentation of its case?
We can proceed today.
You have witnesses present? And
we do have witnesses present.
And the documents have been submitted that you intend to submit for this
record?
That
is correct.
Okay. Well, that's what we'll do. We will allow the city then to present its case, and then at the conclusion of that case, I'll entertain your motion for continuance, and it appears that it would be appropriate to grant it. But I think it might be helpful, since the city witnesses are here and we have all the city documents, that you as the appellant be given that opportunity to see the city's case, and that can help shape your response. So the city would present its case this morning, and then we determine a date that you might provide a response. Does that seem fair to you, Mr. Sharp?
Thank you, Your Honor. That's fair.
And Mr. Hearing Examiner, if I may follow up, there was a document that the city filed yesterday with regard, or it might have been Monday, with regard to a revised witness list. We had identified Mr. Thomas Ivy, who is Mr. Sharaway's neighbor, adjacent neighbor. Mr. Sharaway is out of town, it's my understanding, and his consultant, Raymond Frey of Halson Frey, is here on his behalf. It's the same testimony, just a different person, and we're hoping to be able to substitute him for Mr. Ivy.
Is there any objection to having that witness present?
I'm not sure, since don't we have a timeline for that? To be
well,
able to
we did. In my pre-hearing order,
yeah.
I identified a time frame for presentation or for identification of witnesses.
Right.
And the city's asking for a substitution of a witness due to unavailability. I think it's appropriate to allow it so then you will know what the city's case is.
That's fine. I'm okay with it.
Okay. So without objection, certainly your witness can present this morning.
Thank you. Then for our first witness, I'd call Fire Marshal LaFlamme to the stand.
And the stand is actually a seat. You can
much.
sit or stand, but it looks more comfortable to be seated. And then once you're seated, I will administer the oath, and that's the process we'll follow for all witnesses that present today. Good morning, sir. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell truth and testimony you give today?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you please state and spell your name for the record?
My name is Jeff LaFlamme. It's spelled L-A, capital F, L-A-M, and the Fire Marshal for the North Shore Fire Department, and we serve the cities of Kenmore and Lake Forest Park.
And as the Fire Marshal for the City of Kenmore, can you explain what your duties are?
I'm responsible for all levels of fire safety and fire prevention. So everything from plan reviews and inspections of new buildings to inspections of existing commercial buildings and fire investigations, public education programs, and the like.
Great. I'm going to ask you to look at what has been submitted already as the city's Exhibit 1. Is that in front of you?
Yes.
Great. Can you tell me what that document is?
This is an incident report from our fire department.
Okay. And are you familiar with incident reports?
Yes. Every fire or emergency-related call that our department goes on, the officer in charge completes an incident report form.
Okay. And is that what this is before you?
Yes.
Okay. Have you had an opportunity to review this incident report?
Yes, I have.
Can you briefly describe what's entailed within it?
So in this is information regarding the address, date that we responded to a particular incident. It gives some basic information about what was discovered and what was done when the crews arrived at the scene.
Great. Let's break that down. So the first one, I think, was the address. What was the address on the incident report?
The address on the report is 15709 61st Avenue Northeast in Kenmore.
And then I believe is a property owner identified.
Property owner identified. Do I have to pronounce this properly?
How about the last name?
Yeah, El Sharway.
Okay. And then what are the, I guess you said, the details or the summary of what they found when they went out to this property?
Yeah, so typically at the end, towards the back part of the incident report, after it covers all the personnel and everyone who was involved with the scene, there is what we call a narrative, and that's typically written by the responding officer. I can read that narrative now.
Or can you provide a summary of what the narrative states?
Sure. And I think kind of the bottom part of the narrative is kind of the important part, where it indicates that Engine 51, which is our engine from the fire station here in downtown Kenmore, says responded to a report of a boat fire on Lake Washington that came in from somewhere on the other side of the lake. The belief was the call-in thought that it was a boat fire. When they arrived, they found, it says, a large 15 by 15 fire of railroad ties that was down near the lake at the bottom of a steep hillside, and that it was railroad ties that were burning.
And then there's a photograph within C1 that looks exactly like that. Those are railroad ties burning. Is that reflective of what was put in the narrative?
Yes.
And then how about your understanding? Did anyone talk to you about this, or how did you become involved in this matter?
Well, our battalion chief, who was on duty at the time, he contacted me via telephone and said that they were at a fire, and gave me a little bit of information. It was railroad ties. It seemed to have been something that they were burning because someone was trying to basically get rid of them without hauling them away. It wasn't an accidental fire or something like that, but it was intentional, that they had extinguished the fire, and he wanted to know, if I needed to respond to investigate, and it sounded pretty straightforward. So I did not respond to that incident, but I asked him to take some photos, and when he explained to me that it appeared that the railroad ties had come from the hillside, that they had been maybe components of some type of retaining system or something like that, I suggested that we should probably forward the information to the city of Kenmore so that they could review and ensure that whatever was being done in the right manner.
Did you forward
hold on.
Oh, excuse me.
A note for the record here. We're proceeding with this case because the city witnesses are present. Mr. Sharway's here without legal counsel. The reason I'm doing that is I anticipate your legal counsel would review this record. The city should offer a transcript without charge to the appellant so they can review the record and then can make objections if this hearing reconvenes. What just occurred was testimony from Mr. Flame that is called hearsay testimony. I'll note for the record that hearsay is specifically allowed in this city as appropriate evidence, and this is referencing Kenmore Municipal Code 120.150, and says specifically the hearing examiner shall allow hearsay testimony by the parties. Also, I'm not to require proof of a chain of custody for evidence, and also I'm to allow any notes, reports, summaries, photographs, or other materials prepared by the parties to be admitted into evidence if requested. And I note that final phrase under Chapter 120, Section 150, because I'm aware the city objected to certain evidence submitted by the appellant. The way I read this guidance offered by the Kenmore City Council is that I have no authority to reject evidence. It'll all be placed in the record. So I interrupt you. I'm sorry for doing that. I should have done this at the outset, but since you went into hearsay testimony, I thought it was an appropriate time to note that all of your material will be admitted into the record, as the Kenmore Municipal Code states I must do, and hearsay evidence will be allowed, as the Kenmore Municipal Code says I must do. I'll note that this Kenmore Municipal Code is an unusual code, and if you have your attorney look at it, they might consider what appropriate action to take with reference to the code itself. However, I have no authority to rule on whether the code is an appropriate code to protect due process and to deal with the issues that you've raised in your appeal. Now, that being said, for the record, please continue with your direct exam of the witness.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. Prior to doing that, I'd like to note for the record that I would object to your admission of Mr. Sharway's exhibits prior to him providing them through witness testimony. I believe he will have that opportunity to request admission at the time that his case goes forward.
Well, don't get too disturbed. I'm only ruling on, you raised an objection.
Understood.
I think just yesterday.
Correct.
By filing an official pleading that objects to Exhibit A2, I believe.
Correct. And I would note
that's what I'm ruling on.
Understood. And I was going to continue the argument is that while the Chapter 1.20 discusses the admissibility of hearsay and foundational evidence, Kenmore Code 19.30.190 specifically says that this hearing examiner shall exclude irrelevant evidence. So to the extent that they offer something and I object at that time as to relevance, again, that's 19.30.190. It doesn't say should, it says shall.
Well, you'll have to,
understood.
I guess, this Chapter 120 is the guidance for contested case hearings.
And it does refer this hearing examiner to, in fact, 19.30 for the rules and conduct of the hearing. I didn't want to go into that until actually we were going to have him admit it, produce it, because it does segue away from these witnesses' testimony. But I just want it for the record and for your
well, I guess we've set the parameters of what's
Thank
involved.
You very much.
And again, we'll note that if this hearing is continued, then there will be an opportunity to present objections.
Thank you very much.
As evidence is submitted. But now we have the discussion set, I guess, between your Chapter 1930 and Chapter 120, Section 150, which again says, any notes, reports, summaries, photographs, or other materials prepared by the parties shall be admitted into evidence if requested. And then you're free to argue the weight.
Thank you.
So
to continue with Fire Marshal LaFlamme, my last question, I think you ended on that there was some discussion on whether the city should be contacted. Are you aware whether or not the city was contacted about this property?
Yes, I believe that they were, and I don't recall for sure whether or not it was Battalion Chief Taggart, who I believe is the one who took the photographs, or if I had just called over to let the code enforcement officer know. I don't remember. I remember receiving the phone call to explain to me about it, and even in the narrative here, one of the reasons why I thought it would be a good idea maybe for the city to take a look at it is in the narrative it indicates, it says, property has large and steep hillside with several failing retaining walls made of railroad ties that are being removed and concrete forms in place. The construction crews were on the beach burning the railroad ties that had been removed from the hillside, and then, we had extinguished the fire. And then at the end it says the case will be forwarded to the North Shore Fire Marshal, which is myself, and the City of Kenmore to determine if there are valid permits for the hillside retaining wall construction.
Okay. Thank you very much. I have no further questions for Fire Marshal LaFlamme.
okay, thank you, sir, for being here. Cross-examination may occur upon reconvening of the hearing. Unless, and I'll just give Mr. Charway an opportunity, did you want to ask any clarifying questions of this witness?
No, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your testimony, and you're excused if you'd like to
Thank
leave
you.
the hearing.
Thank
Did you
you.
have any other witnesses you wanted to call?
I do, thank you. Mr. Bauer, I'd like to ask to testify next.
Good morning. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell truth and testimony you give today?
I do.
Thank you. Can you state your name, spell it for the record, and tell us what your job is?
Sure. Andrew Bauer, last name spelled B-A-U-E-R. I'm a planner with the Development Services Department here with the city. And as a planner, my focus is current development review and also or where it comes into administering zoning code, critical areas, and the shoreline management code.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to look at what has been, first of all, can I ask the hearing examiner, can we please admit C1 into the record?
Yes. C1 is in front of us, subject to any objections that the appellant counsel might raise upon reconvening.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you, Mr. Bauer, to look at C2, and there's that first page. Can you describe what that first page is?
Yes, C2 is a printout from the city's online GIS mapping tool. And it indicates, it's got a box drawn around the property. Looks like it's 15709 61st Avenue. And depicted on the property is several overlays indicating the different environmental critical areas and shoreline management overlays on it.
And then from this, again, this is a city tool, is that correct?
Correct.
And are you familiar with this tool?
Yes.
Do you use this in your daily work?
Yes.
Okay. And when you review this, can you tell me or interpret what information this gives to you?
Yes, so what this tells me is the property, again at 15709, is mapped within a landslide hazard area. It's depicted by the orange crosshatch, and then the legend is on the right-hand side, which indicates landslide hazard area. And then kind of on the left side of the map, you see the blue overlay that's indicating Lake Washington, and then the green overlay is the shoreline jurisdiction area, and that actually extends 200 feet from the edge of Lake Washington. It's kind of underneath the landslide hazard cross-hatching.
Excuse me, why do you say landslide hazard? Doesn't that identification just say landslide area? Your key, when you look at the key,
Yes, you're correct.
so you add in hazard?
I guess I'm referring to how it's referenced in the city's critical areas code.
But to clarify, Mr. Bauer, the paper you have in front of you just says landslide area, correct?
It does,
Okay.
yes.
I want you to know I'm paying attention.
I am, I'm going to actually have you go towards City Exhibit 8. Do you have that in front of you?
Yes.
Okay. What is that document?
This is a pretty standard correction notice that was issued by the city.
And have you yourself issued any of these, or are you familiar with this type of document?
I've issued them before, not typically, but yes, I'm familiar. I typically will assist in preparing some of the language and things that go into them.
And what is the correction notice? What's the purpose for it?
The purpose is to seek voluntary correction from a property owner or someone who's potentially violated any of the municipal codes. The city's policy is always to work with people that may have committed a violation to get voluntary correction prior to issuing a violation notice.
And what's the date this was issued?
December 10th, 2015.
And then who is it directed towards?
Mr. L. Sharaway,
And then can you identify the address?
15709 61st Avenue Northeast.
So what were the violations noted in this correction notice for Mr. Sharaway?
So there's a list of violations here cited. The first one under the violation heading says grading operations cause erosion and surface water drainage problem. Number 2 is land alterations and retaining wall construction without receiving a permit first. Number 3 is concrete retaining walls were poured after the stop work order was placed on May 27, 2015. Number 4 states a hazard has been made by removing old retaining wall structures and replacing some without a geotech report and inspections of the walls.
Okay. And then, so those are the violations that were identified. Is corrective action also identified?
Yes.
And what is that?
So following after the violations, it states corrective action required, and states on May 27, 2015, the city posted a stop work order and made you directed at Mr. Sharaway, aware of the violations. On August 25, 2015, it came to the city's attention construction on the retaining walls has not stopped. August 28, 2015, we met at City Hall and told you what is required to receive permits. Immediately, it is required to take steps necessary to stabilize the hillside in conformance of the 2009 King County Surface Water Design Manual. This work needs to be completed before December 14, 2015 at 9 a.m. This temporary erosion control must remain in place and be constantly maintained throughout the rain season, which is October 1st through April 15th.
And does it also identify what types of permits are required?
Yes. Next paragraph states that the following permits need to be applied for, which include a building permit, grading permit, and shoreline exemption checklist.
So this corrective notice essentially is telling the owner, Mr. Sharaway, that there are violations on his property and how he would need to correct it. Is this a notice of violation itself or just a warning, if you will?
This would appear to be a warning because it kind of outlines the timelines to move or to comply by applying for the necessary permits.
Okay. And it talks about the initial stop work order on May 27th, 2015, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to ask that the city's exhibit number 8 be admitted.
Yeah, and to clarify the process that we use here in this hearing examiner forum in the city of Kenmore, the exhibits you submitted are
Already admitted.
presumed to be admitted
Okay.
unless there's an objection, and then we rule on the objection. Again, because of this unusual procedure, if the appellant's counsel has objections, we'll entertain those later. But right now, you can
Understood.
assume they're admitted.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hearing Examiner. That should help to expedite. I'm going to ask that you go ahead and look at City Exhibits 2. And there are a variety of photographs under C2. Have you had an opportunity to look at those?
Yes.
Okay. Can you summarize what it portrays, what the photographs portray? Oh, first of all, I'm going to, on the first one, photo 1, is there a date stamp on it?
Yes, in the bottom right corner, the date stamp says 5/27/2015.
Great. And then there's some sort of summary at the top left hand. Could you read that for us?
Yes, it says site visit photos 5/27/15, and it references the code enforcement case P 2015-029 Sharaway.
Okay. And then I'm going to ask that you go to the second photograph. What does that photograph depict?
Looks like a pit in the ground that's been excavated. Looks like there's some ash and debris kind of strewn about. I'm assuming this is where the railroad ties had been burning.
Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to ask you to go to photo 3 and describe briefly what that photograph depicts.
So this photo is looking down at some concrete that looks like it's been poured and some rebar extending up out of the ground.
Okay. And then going to photograph 4, same question. What does that depict?
Similar to the last, it looks like it's maybe taken from a different angle. Again, you see concrete that's been poured, rebar extending up. Looks like it's retaining some of the slope there.
Okay. And then going to the next photograph, photo 5, what does that depict?
Looks to be taken a little higher up the slope. You can pretty easily see where the hillside's been cut in for retaining walls. Again, you see the concrete, the rebar. There's 3 people standing down near the shoreline.
Holding tools?
Yeah, holding tools. And then there's some equipment and things kind of around them, so it looks like they've been working on the hillside.
It suggests that. So when you look at that, I noticed that those cuts in the ground, and it looks like cement is poured. Is the cement above grade?
It looks to be below grade.
Okay, so it's not raised above the natural ground, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then the next photograph, what does that look like? Or what does that depict?
Some sort of tool. I'm not sure what that is.
And then the photograph 7, what does that depict?
And for the record, using numerical identification, the exhibit I has alphabetical. So if one's following along, the numbers line up with the letters. Do you have numbers on yours?
I don't.
I have exhibit 2G. For
Oh, I apologize. I do not have those.
Okay.
Thank you. So that's 2G. I'll write that.
I don't. You
Thank
were
you.
using a number.
Correct, and I will use those from now on. I apologize. I did not have that. Going to 2G. Can you describe that?
So 2G was the previous one with the tool. Mine are also.
Oh,
labeled
2G
with
was
letters, yes.
the orange one. Okay,
And
That's not how I have it.
and I thought that the next one was
Okay.
the 2G.
Okay, mine must be different. So the next one shows, it looks like the edge of the house and some type of corrugated pipe coming out. It's some type of a drain, maybe a roof drain or something.
And 2H, is that a similar type photo?
Yes.
Okay. And then going back to photograph D, and 2D would be the photograph with the 3 workers. I believe you earlier testified that Mr. Sharaway's property had an overlay of landslide area. If work like this was required or was being done on this property, in your knowledge or understanding, would a permit be required?
Yes.
Okay. And were those permits identified in City Exhibit 8 for that correction notice?
Yes.
Okay. And could you again briefly summarize what those would be?
Yeah, the permits identified were a building permit, grading permit, and a shoreline exemption.
Okay. I'm going to ask that you go to City's Exhibit C3 and describe what that photograph depicts. And Mr. Hearing Examiner, does that also say 3A? Does that photo, I don't have any identification on mine.
I'm sorry, are you moving to a different set of photographs?
Correct. C3.
Yes, that's how I have it.
3A. Thank you. Could you describe 3A for me?
Yes, 3A is a picture of a City of Kenmore stop work order that's been posted, and it's date stamped in the lower right, August 25th, 2015.
And can you see, it's hard for me because I'm pretty short-sighted, but farsighted. What does the posted date say in the actual document? Can you see that?
It matches the date of the timestamp on the photo, so August 25th, 2015.
Okay. And what does this stop work, why are stop work orders posted?
Stop work orders are posted when someone's conducting work without a permit that's necessary.
Okay. And is this date, well, never mind, that's a separate question. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and look at the next photograph, which is C-3B. And what does that depict?
That's a picture of another stop work order, and this one's posted on a deck railing.
So a second one on wood or the pilings, and then one on the deck. How about the next photograph, 3C?
This looks like it's the same one.
Correct.
On the deck railing.
Okay. And then how about 3D?
Uh, 3D is a picture of a concrete wall, it looks like, doesn't look like rebar, it looks like some type of a pipe or something extending up out of it.
Is that concrete above grade?
It looks partially above grade, looks like it's partially buried.
Okay. And then the next photograph, 3E.
This looks like some materials that are piled up, looks like rebar.
Okay. And then the next photograph, 3F, as in Frank.
This is a picture of another stop work order. Again, date stamped August 25th. It looks like this one's posted right next to the address numbers and front door.
Thank you. And then
Well, I don't understand. Is this a third stop work order? You've testified to there is a, and then you said a second stop work order. Now you say another. Is another something different than the first or second?
Yes, this was a third stop work order
So
posted.
but when you say a third stop work order, you mean that the property had 3 separate notices posted on the property at the same time, on the same day?
Yes.
So they weren't different stop work orders. He just received 3 different stop work orders so that they could see it. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I believe the intent was that anyone working on the site would see the stop work order.
Because one's on the
notice was
deck,
posted.
one is on some pilings, and one's at the front door, but they're all the same document, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then going to photograph 3G, what does that depict?
This looks like a number of tools and materials that are piled along a pretty big cut, it appears, on the hillside.
Okay. Does that cut give you concern?
Yeah, it looks steep, if not almost entirely vertical. It looks completely exposed and almost looks like it's been kind of eroding, or some of the dirt has sloughed off as you look kind of where in the picture, as you continue down the hillside or the slope. Looks like there's quite a bit of loose dirt there.
Do you see any types of temporary erosion control measures in this photograph?
No.
Okay. Please describe the next photograph, 3H.
This is, again, more concrete and more rebar. Looks like some of the concrete, again, is almost entirely buried. And then it looks like in the foreground of the picture, there's maybe some forms or something that have been placed for more concrete.
And then, again, the next photograph, 3I.
Yeah, it looks like some concrete formwork and more materials and supplies, tools, and concrete in the background.
The concrete in the background and the forefront, can you see whether or not that is below grade or above grade?
Looks like it's primarily below grade with some of it exposed above grade.
Okay, and do you see any temporary erosion control measures in this photograph?
No.
Can you please describe the next photograph, 3J?
3J, again, more clearly showing the formwork for the concrete in the background, and then the kind of in the middle of the picture is a tree that's been cut or partially cut.
And then the next photograph, 3K.
More concrete formwork and concrete walls.
Now, can you please describe that concrete work? Is that at grade, below grade, or above grade?
Again, it looks to me like it's primarily below grade with some of the concrete walls exposed above grade.
Tell me why I'm concerned whether it's above or below grade.
I'm just trying to show the progression of the work. But
Okay, because it introduces a whole set of questions about what grade is and whether it was
Understood.
original grade or modified grade.
I'll change the question.
Well, not if it, does it go to a alleged violation?
Yes, well, not
Above
the
or
grade.
below?
No, the grade isn't
Then
relevant.
we can kind of skip that, right?
Right.
That would be helpful.
Does this photograph show a progression of work that wasn't within the photographs you described in C2?
Let me flip back to C2 here. Yes, comparing C2 and C3, definitely it appears there's much more substantial concrete's been poured. The walls in C3 are really taking shape as opposed to C2 where you just see some of the rebar and things extending up. In C3 you see the progression of the wall going up and almost taking on a final condition.
And then can you please describe the next photograph in C3, 3L?
Again, it looks like more concrete walls, more concrete formwork, and maybe some of the, or one of the walls maybe in the process of being backfilled.
Okay, and then the date stamp on the bottom right.
August 25th, 2015.
Okay. And then briefly depict 3M, the next photograph.
Yeah, this is kind of a more zoomed out shot of the hillside looking down, and you kind of see how substantial some of the formwork and the cut on the hillside is.
And when you say the cut, is that, so at the very near point of the photograph, there looks to be some sort of just groundwork. Is that what you mean by the cut?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of where the hillside is exposed and where the walls are being poured.
And then do you see any temporary erosion control measures in this photograph?
No.
Okay. And then can you go to the next photograph, 3N?
Yeah.
And then what is that?
This looks like it's looking down the hill, and it's potentially maybe a property line has been strung or something there.
And then if you will go to the next document, it's not a photograph, it has the title Stop Work. What does the description of the Stop Work document say? Why it was issued?
It says no permit for work, last stop work order violation, tree removal with no permit.
Okay, and what was the date for that?
August 25th, 2015.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you to go to Exhibit C4, which looks to be an email from you. Is that correct?
Correct.
Can you describe just the contents of the email and what led you to draft this email?
Yes, so the email is summarizing a conversation that Mike Thomas, former code enforcement officer with the city, and myself had with Mr. Sherway.
Okay, and so you had a meeting with Mr. Sharway?
Yes.
Okay, and when was the date of that meeting?
August 28th, 2015.
So that would have been after the stop work order had been posted, is that correct?
Yes.
Or the second stop work order?
Yes.
Okay. And can you, if you can recall, briefly just describe the meeting itself?
So Mike and I met with Mr. Sherway, and he had come in that morning in response to the stop work orders that had been posted on the 25th of August. And we sat down with him in a conference room here at City Hall and talked to him about what he needed to do to remedy the stop work order, get that lifted.
And let's stop there. So what were the remedies?
Essentially, file a permit application for all of the work that had been occurring. So that would include building permits for the retaining walls, grading permit for the land alteration. We informed him that the work would require a geotechnical engineer just because of the slope, being that it's in a landslide area. And then also he would need to file for a shoreline exemption.
Okay. And what was his response to that?
He had kind of expressed that he didn't want to get the permits. Multiple times he kind of encouraged us to look the other way and just make an exception this one time, and that he would take care of it.
Okay. And were you able to do that?
No.
And did you tell him?
When did that happen? When was your conversation where this occurred?
This was the morning of August 28th, 2015.
And who else was present? When you say they or we?
Mike Thomas.
Okay, thank you.
So there was 3 in the meeting, 3 people?
Yes, it was myself, Mike Thomas, and Mr. Sherway.
And you mentioned, or you testified, that you had also recommended a geotech. Is that correct?
Yes.
And again, what was the purpose for that?
Because of the slope on the property, just the sensitive nature of how steep it is, wanting to have a professional engineer kind of assess the work that had been done, and then also provide recommendations on the design of the walls.
Okay. And the email identifies that the permits were attached. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. We provided him with the application forms and everything necessary for him to file for a permit.
Okay, and in fact, are those a part of C4, the permit applications? Were those the ones that were provided in the email?
Yes.
What were those permit applications?
So the first one is labeled on mine C4B, and it has a copy of a sticky note. We actually gave him a hard copy of this materials at the meeting that morning, and then attached it to this email that we sent to him.
So Mr. Sharway received these in 2 different ways.
Yes.
Okay. And can you describe the other permit documents that you gave him?
Yes, so the first one labeled in the upper left corner is Form 101. It's the city's standard permit application form.
And that's C-4B?
Correct. C-4C is Form 302. It's the city's grading permit checklist. So this is a checklist that would be completed by an applicant and kind of tells them what they need to submit for a grading permit application.
Now, I see in subsection 3 of that grading permit that there's 2 boxes checked. Which are those? What are those boxes that have been checked?
Yes, so I checked these boxes, and the first one is landslide hazard, and the next one is erosion hazard.
And why did you check those?
I checked those based off of the city's critical area mapping that indicates his properties in both landslide and erosion hazard.
Thank you. And then the next page, C4D, there is a star on subsection 7. What is that? Did you put that star there?
I did, yes. We informed him that he needed to stabilize his site to the best of his ability while he sought permits from the city, understanding that it's a sensitive slope, that he needed to stabilize it, get temporary erosion control measures up.
Okay. And then the next page, C-4E, there's something highlighted that says geotechnical report. Did you highlight that?
Yes.
And was that, why did you do that?
We informed him that he would need to get a geotechnical engineer as part of the grading permit application.
So the next application is C-4F as in Frank, retaining wall checklist. And I'll just go to there's an area highlighted. Did you highlight that?
Yes.
And why did you do that?
This is under the section for submittal requirements of construction plans for retaining walls. And although the walls may not have all been over 6 feet in height, it's required when deemed necessary by the building official to be designed by a professional engineer licensed in the state.
And would that be because of the steepness of the site?
Yes.
Okay. There's some other documents. Do you want to just very briefly describe what those are?
Yes. Exhibit C4G is the checklist of materials needed to request a shoreline exemption. So I had marked up kind of what he would need to submit at a minimum.
And then some things are stricken out, meaning he didn't have to provide certain information. You did that, so the NA is not applicable. You don't have to do it?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we were trying to work with him and really kind of narrow down what, some of these forms and paperwork can be overwhelming to a property owner, so we try to work with them and really focus on what we need at a minimum to guarantee that we have a complete permit submittal.
And then on page C4J, I see a preferred geotechnical consultants. You provided that to him also?
Yes. So
It's at the top.
yeah, this was mailed March 30th, 2016.
Okay. And can you please, essentially, what is this notice of a violation?
What is the violation? Or
No, what is this document?
This is kind of a last resort for the city typically. After the city's worked with a property owner to seek remedy or voluntary compliance with a violation, kind of as a last resort, we filed the notice of violation, which then sets into place all of these other procedures.
And it's my understanding under subsection, or no. So as you mentioned, it's the last, effort. Did you get voluntary compliance?
No.
Okay. And what are the violations identified in this notice of violation? It looks like there's only 4.
Yes. So the description of violations, violation 1 states Kenmore Municipal Code 1525070, permit required. So it references land alteration language, again for the grading and the retaining wall work.
So essentially, this was cited because Mr. Sharway didn't obtain a permit before work. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And how about the second one?
Second one is violation of Kenmore Municipal Code 1530-200, which references...
Yeah, I can read it. That's fine.
Okay. And then how about the third violation?
Violation of Section 1530-600, stop work order, and unlawful continuance.
So why would that have been identified? What occurred that you would have cited him for this?
Yeah. Basically, work continued after a stop work order was posted. The work between May 27 of 2015 and August 25th, 2015.
Thank you. And then how about that last violation?
It's a violation of Municipal Code 15-25-060 hazards.
And I know that the code says, you know, we seek for voluntary compliance first, then you issue a notice violation when you don't get voluntary. But it also identifies corrective actions. What would the corrective actions be to remedy these 4 violations? And if you're asking the hearing examiner for corrective actions, what would they be?
They would be to have a professional engineer essentially prepare plans and a design to stabilize the hillside, construct the walls as necessary potentially, submit those permits to the city, so it'd be in the form of a grading permit, a building permit, and a shoreline exemption request.
Okay. And then I see that there's penalties also identified. Where do the penalties come from?
The penalties are in the Kenmore Municipal Code.
Okay, and they're identified by the sections, correct? That's page C-9C.
Yes.
Okay. I have no further questions.
Tell me about the penalties. Did you calculate those?
I did not.
Are you aware of how the calculation was derived? And the reason for my inquiry, I'll expose that, is because it appears that you are considering all 4 as one violation. In other words, you didn't calculate based on each alleged violation to be an independent assessment of penalty. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what it appears.
Okay. Is that a deviation from past practices of the city?
I'm not typically involved with assessing the
Okay,
penalties.
you're the wrong person to ask. All right. Okay. That completes then Mr. Bauer's testimony. Again, Mr. Sharway, if you want to ask any clarifying questions of Mr. Bauer, I want to give you that opportunity to do so, recognizing that if the hearing is reconvened, you or your attorney would have further opportunity to cross-examine.
Okay, can I ask a question, Mr. Examiner? So, can I, by asking the questions right now, is this violating the extension, or is this still?
No, I want to give you 2 opportunities. I want to make sure you have a full understanding of what his testimony is.
Now, I'm not familiar with, the hearing, and I have never been in one. So now we can we bring somebody else that, like the sheriff, from the fire department? Is this something that I can always ask for to bring him back for questions, or no?
Well, I can give you that opportunity.
Yeah.
What I described at the outset of the hearing,
Yeah.
when you asked for a continuance, is that we would allow the city to give its information today. And I did that in an effort to fully inform you of what the city's case might be, well in advance of you having to provide any response. Now, you have that option. You're the one that can decide if you want to recall a witness or ask a witness questions today. I want to give you that opportunity to do so. This is not a case where you're required to have an attorney. It's not a situation where there'd be a constitutional requirement to provide you with an attorney. Mm-hmm. There is no criminal charge pending in this forum. This is just looking at civil penalties. Thus far, the city has not indicated that it's considering any misdemeanor action, although they could do so under the code, but we've had no indication they're going to do that, nor has the city indicated any desire to pursue emergency orders, which they have the opportunity to do so under the code, but they've elected not to do that, even though they find a threat to public health. So I want to give you freedom to decide how you'd like best to proceed. And if you want to ask Mr. Bauer questions, certainly. If you want to recall Mr. LaFlame, he stayed in the hearing room, certainly you can do that. What would you like to do now?
I'd like to ask Mr. Andrew, a couple
Marcy?
of questions.
Good.
Mr.
Okay.
Andrew, a couple of questions. Thank you so much for taking the time. How many times have you seen me in the city's building?
Several times. I don't know. I don't have an exact number.
But I believe you've seen me almost here every 2-3 days, right?
I wouldn't say that. Last year, I think it was August, around the time that the stop work orders were posted. Yeah.
Have you seen me any time before August, or just August was the beginning? That's the first time you have seen me.
I don't recall.
You don't recall. Let me ask you a question. So the meeting, let's go back to the meeting. We met. Can you tell me where did we meet, me and you and Mike?
We met in the community meeting room, which is right next door to the council chambers here at City Hall.
How long do you think that meeting ended up taking?
As I recall, it was about a half hour, maybe 40 minutes.
Do you believe we were sitting in the room, or did we go to the front desk and came back to the room? The whole time we were sitting at the room having a meeting?
I think we may have started at the front desk and then moved to the meeting room.
Okay, so the whole time we were at the meeting room, and then I walked out and left from the meeting room, and I went home, or I left the building, right? Okay, so let me ask you a question. Going back to, I'm sorry, please be patient with me. It's going back to the exhibit where there's a witness list. Let's see, sorry, here. Yeah, exhibit C4. We'll start with a couple of things. First, you said that you printed out this page with the geotech referrals, because I did mention to you that it was a very hard time for me to find the geotech that's familiar with the hillside to be able to work with me, and I'm trying very hard to get permits and to get geotech and to get engineer, which I do have a geotech that worked with me before, Mr. Ted Shepard from Tierra Associates. And going back to what happened before, I never created a hazard for this hillside. It was created by the city, because I cannot go across the street and dig the street to be able to create a protection for my house to be able to protect the
Mr.
hillside.
Hearing Examiner, I'm just going to object as to the narration.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the way the procedure works and has to work in this hearing room, because of the ordinances that apply, you have an opportunity to ask Mr. Bauer questions about what he testified about. But you see, what you began to do, and the reason the city attorney objected, is that you started telling me your story.
Okay.
And that's called testimony. And you can only do that if you're placed under oath.
Okay.
And then you must tell the truth, or it's perjury if you don't tell the truth. So we make a real clear line between asking questions of a witness to clarify what he said, and then once you're done with that, if you choose to testify, then you're placed under oath, and then you must tell the truth.
Okay.
Because you see the difference between the two?
Yes, I'm sorry.
So if you want to ask Mr. Bauer questions, then you can do that now,
Thank
with no testimony.
So this page with the geotech, you said that you handed out the geotech that day. I don't see how possible you went out and printed this from King County and you give it to me while we were in a room and we didn't leave the room.
So the question is, this list from King County entitled Selecting a Geotechnical Consultant, Mr. Bauer testified that he gave this to you.
Right.
And I think on the August meeting date. And you're asking, is that really true? Or how could that be
Is it true that you gave it to me that day?
So as I recall, we definitely gave you the city's permit application forms, and I believe during the meeting, as you were expressing your difficulty in getting an engineer, I had referenced that we had this list to reference, and so I may not have given the geotech consultant list to you at the meeting, but it was attached to the email, as I recall.
Okay,
the
so you-
email that's Exhibit C4A.
Okay. So you did not give me the geotech report or referrals that day?
I gave it to you in the email that was sent that same day, that afternoon.
Okay. I just want to make sure that on the record, because you did mention while we were talking just a minute ago, that you did give it to me, which that's not true. So thank you. Now, the next thing, the drawing, I came in. You believe that this is the day also I give you that drawing?
I can't recall if you gave it to us that day or not.
Okay, because you did mention also that I did. I came in and this was handed to Brian Hampson. This was never to you or Mike Thomas. Mike Thomas and yourself, who were sitting in a room, I was talking to you.
Mr.
but
Hearing
it's never-
Examiner, I'm going to object to the narration.
sorry.
Yeah, you're making a point in your questions,
Yeah.
and that's fine to do. It goes to the credibility of the witness. And you wanted to show that Mr. Bauer said he gave the geotech list to you, but he now says, I did not, I emailed it to you.
Yes.
And now secondly, you asked, did you give the drawings to him? He said, yes, you did. On August 28th, you established that you did not. They went to Hampson. So that's it.
Okay.
That's questions,
sorry.
response. Testimony is different.
Okay, I'm
So,
sorry.
Any more questions
I'm
for
sorry.
Mr. Bauer?
Okay, I'm sorry. One last question. Have you ever been to the house?
No.
Have I asked you to come to the house?
I believe that first meeting you did, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
I have no
Did
further
the city
questions.
have any redirect of your witness following the questions by Mr. Sharaway?
I do not.
Thank you, Mr. Bauer, for your presence here today and for your testimony. You are excused from the hearing room if you care to leave the hearing room. Did the city have any further witnesses this morning?
We do, thank you. The city would ask Mr. Raymond Fry to testify?
It's Mr. Raymond Fry.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Fry, if you'd please come forward, take a seat
Oh, that'd be
there
great.
where
Thank
the
you.
witnesses are presenting information, and then we'll ask you to take the oath, and then you can begin your testimony. You swear to tell truth and testimony you give today?
I do.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Thank you, Mr. Fry. Could you state your full name and spell the last one for the record?
My name is Raymond Fry, F-R-E-Y.
And what's your occupation?
I'm a managing member of Haltz and Fry, LLC, a land use consulting and entitlement firm located in Kirkland, Washington.
Okay. And we have you been here for this morning's testimony?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And we have we've had testimony regarding a specific piece of property. The address is 15709 61st Avenue Northeast in Kenmore. Are you familiar with that property?
Yes, ma'am, I am. It's located directly to the south of my client's property.
And who is your client?
My client is Dr. Ivy, Dr. Tom Ivy.
Okay. And what is his address? Dr. Ivy.
I'll have to get it.
Oh, that's fine. Please do.
Dr. Ivy's residence is 15717, 61st Avenue Northeast.
And is that adjacent to Mr. Sharaway's property?
Yes, it
To-
is directly to the north
Thank you.
of Mr. Sharaway's property.
And I believe you mentioned that Dr. Ivy is your client. Why did he hire you?
Dr. Ivy hired our firm to entitle a cable lift tram going from his house to the waterfront.
Okay. And when you say entitled, can you explain that?
Yes, it's do all the stuff you've just been hearing about, which is get permits, shoreline substantial development permit, as well as construction permits.
And is that what you do as a profession?
That's what our firm does, yes.
And how long have you been doing that?
29 years.
Okay. And so Mr. Ivy hired you. How did you become familiar with the neighbor's property next door, Mr. Sharaway's property?
We had a meeting at the city where we got it was our pre-application hearing, and I went and I looked at the property after that.
Mr. Ivy's property.
Dr. Ivy's property. And then on August 26th, Dr. Ivy called me and said, could you go look at the property? There's all sorts of construction going on next door, and it's got my daughter concerned, and she was staying in the house at that time with her newborn baby.
And did you go to Mr. Sharaway's property then?
On August 26th, I went to Mr. Sharaway's property. Actually, I went to Dr. Ivy's property, walked down, and noticed considerable destruction of trees on Dr. Ivy's property, a lot of scraping of the land, and followed it all the way down to the waterfront and noticed a crew working.
Okay, and so let me clarify. So you were on Dr. Ivy's property and you went down to the shoreline?
Yes, I followed his path all the way down to the shoreline.
Okay, and then you said you saw construction on whose property did you
I saw
see?
construction, a team of men working on doing various things, including what looked like forms, construction of forms. It's hard to tell. I just was surprised to see so much going on there.
Okay, and then I'm going to ask you to go to City's Exhibit C-10. Actually, no. And before I ask you questions on that, I interrupted you. So you went down with Dr. Ivy's daughter and you saw construction of what you have described as forms. Could you further describe that? I don't know what forms mean.
Well, first of all, not with Dr. Ivy's daughter.
Oh, okay.
I went down alone.
Oh, okay.
She remained in the house. I went down and I saw debris, wooden forms, construction debris in general, burned. It looked like burned trees and things like that. And the shocking thing to me was the entire site was totally denuded. It had been scraped clean. In 30 years I've been in this business, I've never been able to obtain a permit to do that on a steep slope.
And when you say denuded, can you explain further? Denuded
Scraped
of what?
clean. Of trees, of shrubs. It just was bare dirt. And this was in August, and I was very concerned because it could have an impact on my client's property right next door.
And you said you saw construction workers, or workers, if you will. What were they doing?
Well, I can't tell you for sure, but they were working on the site. They were involved in construction work on that site.
How long were you out on Dr. Ivy's property?
Not more than about 20, 30 minutes. I took photos, and then I sent those photos to Dr. Ivy, and I sent those photos to Mike Thomas, the code enforcement officer also.
Okay. And then did you tell anyone at the city? What did you do after you saw this?
Well, I spoke to Mike Thomas. After I sent him those photos, I went in and I saw him, and I would say that he said, I'm aware of what's going on, but I can't discuss it with you.
And again, Mike Thomas was at the city at the time?
Yes, he was the code enforcement officer during that time.
Okay. And now I'll ask that you go to Exhibit C-10. Are you familiar with that photograph? It's C-10A.
Yes,
And-
I've seen this.
And how are you familiar with it?
Well, this was taken by a member of the Ivy family. I believe it was Dr. Ivy's wife, Mrs. Ivy. Her initials are MFI.
Okay, and it says taken by MFI at the bottom of the photograph, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then, so did she give you this photograph?
Dr. Ivy sent it to me.
Okay. And what does it depict?
Well, it depicts a lot of what I saw. Just construction, ongoing construction, a lot of debris, and you'll notice when I said denuding of the site, it's just as if it's been scraped clean of all brush and trees.
And it also says June 2015. Do you know if that's when Mrs. or Dr. Ivy, she's also a doctor, when she took it?
Well, yes, they were aware that there was some kind of code violation going on, but they don't know anything about that stuff. They just hope there was. And she took this and it points out the cedar trees and some of the debris that I mentioned.
Okay. Can you go to the next photograph in 10CB?
Yes.
And what does that depict?
Well, it's just, it still is shocking to me. I've never seen anything like this. If you look, you'll see a white wall, almost vertical, coming down. And I also had the doctor survey his property so we could actually locate where all of this construction was going on.
So let me stop you first before we go further.
Yep.
So you just said a white wall going down. Can you please identify which wall you're talking about?
By the way, you see those forms, those wooden forms? Those are what I was referring to before when you mentioned. See those
the
vertical
forms. Thank you.
that they pour
Got it.
concrete behind?
So the retaining wall.
If you go to the left of that top wall, you'll see a white wall going up the property there.
Okay.
And that also is located on the Ivy's property, according to the survey that was done. As well as, if you look at the bottom left of that picture, you'll see a white post at the bottom left. That is the marker for the Ivy's property. So you can see there's quite a bit of construction that's gone on their property.
And it appears to, the words taken by TDI are there. Who is TDI?
That's Tom Ivy, Dr. Ivy.
And then
And you'll also notice he points out the cedar trees are gone.
and that
Those
there-
were those big trees you saw in the previous picture.
And what's the date for that photograph?
November 2015.
And then how about the next photograph, 10C?
Yeah.
I think this goes to your line of testimony earlier about the property line.
Yes,
Is that
ma'am.
correct?
There is the stake at the bottom that is pointed out, and he has basically drawn a pencil or pen line up to an X at the top, which shows where the other marker is that depicts his property line. So there's quite a bit of encroachment.
So when you went out to the property, I think you said late August, may have been August 26th. Again, were these the forms that you saw at that time?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And then let's go to the next photograph. It is C10D as in dog.
Yes, ma'am, I'm familiar with it.
What is this?
This is located, and I had them locate this on the...
When you say this, I apologize. Can you
I'm
describe
sorry, this
what's
structure
depicted?
that you see, which is a seat, used to be in the trees.
I don't understand when you say it's
Well,
been in the tree.
It's a nice place to sit with trees around it, or
Okay.
it was. You can look now and you can see that it's just like it's been scraped clean. This, and above it you'll see this whole line of timbers to the left of the seat. You can see that. And this is at the end of a meandering path that goes down from Dr. Ivy's house, stops there, comes down, walks, and then comes back down, and is the path that we use to get to the lake. And the tram that we are entitling for that, or have entitled, we have a building permit for it, would basically eliminate that path just going straight down to the lake itself. That's why they did it. The Ivies are in their 70s. So they want to be able to access the beach easier.
So this structure, the seat,
Yeah.
and then the hillside that goes up to the left, is that Mr. Sharway's property or Dr. Ivy's property?
Mr. Sharway's property.
Okay, and it appears fairly steep.
Yes.
Does it to you? Okay,
Well, you're probably going to look at C11X, right?
that is correct. Can we go to the next photograph, 10E?
Yeah.
And what is that?
Well, that's...
Oh, is that the wall you were mentioning?
That
Okay.
was a wall that was constructed and is also partially located on the Ivy's property. And you'll notice Dr. Ivy points out the erosion already taken place on his property from this wall that's been constructed. And this part is on his property.
And then it says dated, is TDI again Mr. Ivy's initials?
Yes, ma'am.
And the date?
November 2015.
Okay. And then that is it. Do you have anything that you'd like to further explain to the hearing examiner why you're here today?
Dr. Ivy could not attend this meeting. He's somewhere in between where he operates in Cincinnati and Ketchum, Idaho. I believe he's trying to get some vacation in. He will be moving here in a matter of months when his house is remodeled. And he asked me to sit in for him today.
Thank you. And I want to make sure I understand. You visited the site when? His property when? I thought you said August.
Yes, sir. I visited the property August 26th and numerous times after that.
In 2015?
2015, yes, sir.
And the testimony was that this is what he observed when you visited?
The photos that were shown to me were Dr. Ivy's photos, but I went down to the beach myself and observed that same thing and also took photos and forwarded them to the city.
Okay. So even though some of the photos have a November 2015 date, your testimony is that looked the same as it does in the photo, even though you were there
Very
several
much the
months?
same.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And I have no further questions.
May I say one other thing? We
please.
do have a survey that was done on the property that I can provide. It shows the location. We did it on purpose to show the location of the wall.
Mm-hmm. Well, that could be helpful in some other context. I don't believe the city is alleging a violation of encroachment or intrusion upon another's property.
We are not. And we were made aware of the survey just recently. But again, I do want to clarify, and thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. So the initial testimony was of yours was when you were actually out there, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And then the latter part of the testimony was describing the photographs that were then taken by others, Dr. Ivy and his wife, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
He came back and visited his property during that time.
Thank you.
Stay there for a moment because I want to give Mr. Sharway an opportunity to ask any clarifying questions of Raymond Fry. And Mr. Fry, also, I wanted to make sure I refer to you properly. Are you a land use consultant?
Yes,
Is that
sir.
the proper? Okay. And not offered as an expert witness, but Ms. Rattan, only for the purpose of identifying photos, is that correct?
Not just identifying the photographs, but his personal experience on the property, watching the workers on Mr. Sharway's property.
Okay. Thank you. So, Mr. Sharway, you have any clarifying questions?
Yes, please.
Mr. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Raymond, for coming to the meeting. We appreciate your time. Couple of questions. So, you've been on the property in November, you mentioned, right? And you have been going to the property and checking out the property and the progress of the tram work and everything going on? Is that right?
There was no construction on tram at that time. I visited the property numerous times to ascertain the location of the tram.
Okay. Okay. And I believe also, well, I guess that question for later, but let me ask you a question. When you were at the property in November, did you see any construction workers or anybody working on the property?
Why are you asking me about November?
While you were there?
I said
or-
August 26th is the day that I was speaking about.
When
Yes,
you
sir.
were there on August 26th, did you see workers on the
Yes, sir.
property?
November? You seen workers in November?
I think I can help. That's the question I was asking.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Because I, too, was confused, and I believe your Exhibit C10, it has photographs with a number of dates,
Right.
and some are taken after Mr. Fry visited the property.
Right?
And that was very confusing to me, and some are taken in November. But Mr. Fry's testimony is that, yes, that photo taken in November, it looked that same way when I visited in August.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. The next question I have, if you can please go to Exhibit C10 and last page, C10E.
That's the one that says soil erosion
Yes, sir.
of ground cover on Fry property, TDI November 2015.
So you mentioned erosion to the hillside. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, this wall, I believe, where you're standing and taking the picture, it was all the way up almost to the house, right?
Not almost to the house, but up 2/3 of the way.
Okay, and it looked like there was erosion coming from underneath.
It's pointed out on the picture.
Yes, sir. I just want to clarify it. Underneath, right?
Next to, underneath, in the vicinity.
Okay. Next to the wall also, there is railroad ties, right?
Yes.
Does this look like this railroad tie is something that's moved, or is it eroded and the hillside is moving, and that's why all the railroad, since you're expert? Can you please tell me?
It just looks like a mess to me.
Okay, but it doesn't look like it's being moved. It's just maybe pressure, water pressure, hillside erosion from the top?
Well, if, based on my experience, I would say that this hillside has suffered a lot of erosion. There's movement, ties moving, soil moving. Typically what happens when you scrape off the undergrowth.
Okay, so, yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fry, for being here and answering the questions.
Yes, sir.
You're free to go if you'd like. Any further witnesses by the city?
Yes, thank you. One last witness, Mr. Brian Hampson, please.
I'm sorry, Mr. Brian Hansen is not on the witness list.
Oh, I believe he is. Is
No,
he
he's
not?
not.
Oh, if he's not.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, you're right.
there's
I
some-
apologize. I withdraw that. I thought he was.
Okay.
Can I call Mr. Mike Thomas to the witness?
Mr. Mike Thomas?
I believe everybody's here, right?
No, Mr. Thomas is not here.
Oh,
If you
he's-
want to list him,
Okay, so he's not here. How about Eric Anderson? Is he here?
Well, let's
He-
take this more slowly.
Okay.
So I want to make sure the record reflects the city called Mr. Hampson but did not list him as a witness.
Yeah.
You objected to that, and then the city withdrew him.
Thank you.
Now, you are proceeding with the case and asking that Mr. Mike Thomas, who I believe is the code enforcement officer for the city?
he was at the time. He has a different job right now.
Okay, he's no longer with the city.
Correct.
And so you want to call your own witnesses? Is that what you'd like to do, Mr. Sharway?
Yes, please. I would like to call Mr. Bill Chang.
Okay.
Prior to appellant's case or witnesses, could I clarify the process? So I understand there's a request for continuance. So if Mr. Sharway has questions of these individuals now, they'll also, if the continuance is granted, be available at a different date, correct? I'm asking, will they be brought forward to that second date? Or maybe this would be the ideal time to address the request for continuance.
I'm giving him that option. As I stated previously, Mr. Sharway has that option of obtaining as much information as he'd like to during the course of this hearing. He's proceeding without legal counsel. I don't think presence of legal counsel is a required due process element. Certainly in this type of proceeding, an appellant can proceed with or without legal counsel. So I wanted to give him that opportunity to, first of all, ask clarifying questions and cross-examination of the city witnesses. And now, and I thank you for giving us pause, because now Mr. Sharway indicates he would like to call some witnesses here today. Am I correct? And the witness you identified is?
I asked for Mike Thomas, and I understand he's no longer with the city. I asked for Eric Anderson. He's on the witness list also.
And he's unavailable.
He's unavailable. Okay.
Well,
So
now are these ones that were identified on your witness list?
yes, sir.
Because I'm looking at that witness list. see yourself, I see, oh, this is the city's witness list.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Now, I do have that. I was looking at your own witness list. So has the city elected not to call those witnesses?
That's correct for our case. We were, however, going to reserve for rebuttal, and that's, again, the question about process is Mr. Sharaway, I understand, will be having ample opportunity to bring forward, well, first question the people we've had testify, but then also we'll be asking questions of the witnesses he has today, and then potentially bringing forth these same individuals and additional people. And we were going to request the opportunity for rebuttal, understanding that there are two opportunities to go forward in this case. So the city didn't want to close its case right now because of rebuttal.
Well, depending upon who Mr. Sharaway would choose to call.
Exactly.
And that's where we are right now. We're looking at who he might choose to call as a witness. That is a bit concerning that ones the city listed as witnesses aren't available. And is that one you mentioned, Mr. Thomas, no longer is employed by the city, and the other is not available because why?
I do not know. Just made unavailable.
Okay. And I'm looking for where in the city code, I believe there is some discussion in the city ordinances about presentation of witnesses. Do you recall where that might be?
I don't offhand. I can look for it.
Well, I think it's important we find that, because this is an opportunity for Mr. Sharaway to call witnesses. I see it now. It's in Section 12150, the procedure at a contested hearing. And this again, this is what your city council, the City Council of Kenmore, has adopted to govern this type of hearing,
I'm
to
sorry.
regulate it.
120 what?
150. And 150 subsection B reads as follows, quote, "The parties are responsible for securing the appearance of any witnesses they wish to call. Neither the city nor the hearing examiner shall have the burden of securing any witnesses on behalf of the person who is contesting the violation or seeking to mitigate the penalties," end quote. This again is I would say, somewhat peculiar to the city of Kenmore. You're under a code here in the city of Kenmore about code enforcement that differs from anywhere else I work. And this does not give me any power to subpoena a witness, and it doesn't require any witness to attend. It puts the obligation on you and on the city. It's a little bit unbalanced. The city obviously usually calls employees that are often frequently available and are in this room today. For you to call a witness that the city chooses not to bring forward, it's a difficult position to be in. But that's what you've done, and we've heard that the two witnesses that you'd like to examine, the city has chosen not to make available.
I don't believe that's an accurate statement. It's not that
Please clarify for me.
Of course, I don't think the city had a choice in not making them unavailable. Witnesses notified the city that they were unavailable.
Okay.
So
So what you're saying is you're in a similar position. You did identify them as witnesses,
correct,
but you didn't secure their presence.
We thought we did, but when an individual says they're not attending, that's really not the city's choice.
Isn't that what I referred to in the ordinance?
Correct.
That's exactly.
I think also that to the extent that the appellants have an additional day, they could in fact secure Mr. Thomas or Mr. Erickson's, I think that's right, presence. But no, the city was unsuccessful in that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you heard that, Mr. Sharaway.
Yes,
you know, everyone has that same challenge of how do you get a witness to this hearing when there isn't any subpoena authority. Mm-hmm. And a subpoena is something where you're required to attend, or there can be sanctions, penalties, or whatnot.
Yes.
And in this city, that does not apply.
Is it only the city of Kenmore that works that way?
Well, it's in my experience, it's unique here,
Right.
but there may be other jurisdictions that have a similar process. In any event, that's what controls.
Right.
And I don't have any authority to override that.
Yeah.
But you may have, is there anyone else that you wanted to have as a witness today?
Actually, I decided not to call my witness today, neither one of my witnesses. I'm very sorry. I mean, I believe that in the beginning of the meeting, I thought I was going to have the city have all their witnesses here, and we asked that question, but it's very strange that all of a sudden they disappeared. I'm sorry.
Well, that's the way the city code works. Is there any way that Mr. Sharway could contact Mr. Thomas? Do we know where he might be?
He is now employed by King County. I am sure we can provide contact information to Mr. Sharway. That's not hard at all. We can do that. Again, he's at a different job right now, and I was told his attendance he wouldn't be here. Could I take 1 minute about the code and the subpoena power? I thought I read something about that. If you will give me a minute.
Oh, certainly.
Very much. So in 1930-190 of the code, under the rules and conduct of the hearing, it talks about adopting rules of conduct. It also does give the hearing examiner the power to issue summons and subpoena to compel the appearance of a witness. So to the extent that Mr. Sharway is unable to secure for his calling of these witnesses, you do have the authority under a different
section. When was
section.
that chapter adopted by the council?
It says Ordinance 11, so that usually means 2011.
Mm-hmm. And chapter?
1930-190.
Mm-hmm. And chapter 120, 150, which seems to conflict with that, was also adopted in 2011.
And that makes sense only in that typically when code enforcement updates, they're done at the same time. So it might have been in the same ordinance.
Well, that's certainly peculiar because as I read subsection B, it speaks directly to securing the appearance of a witness. Can you reference again your section?
It is subsection 19.30.190.
And how does it read?
The first paragraph, the third sentence of the first paragraph says, the hearing examiner shall have the power to issue summons and subpoena to compel the appearance of witnesses and production of documents and materials, to order discovery and to administer oaths and preserve order. I believe that 120 does, in fact, I don't remember the specific section, reference conduct of hearings 1930, and that's what directed me to this, not the specific subsection.
Well, it does, and here's the challenge, and I don't know if we need to make a ruling on it today, but the challenge is that 1930, that chapter is a general chapter applying to hearing examiner hearings, correct? And Chapter 120, apparently adopted at or about the same time, specifically refers to code enforcement. So it would be my interpretation that for whatever reason, the City Council decided, well, we're going to have general rules for hearings before the hearing examiner and give power to subpoena and power to order discovery. But when it comes to code enforcement, in this chapter, which is specific to code enforcement, and therefore I think likely governs code enforcement proceedings, even though you are correct, the lead sentence to 120.150 says, shall conduct a hearing to contest a violation pursuant to Chapter 1930 when such hearing is properly and timely requested. However, that subsection B is so specific as to the parties being responsible for securing the appearance of witness.
Understood.
Yeah.
And we're happy also, like I said, to try and assist Mr. Sharway in obtaining Mr. Thomas's appearance if possible.
Mhm. And that's really the best way to go about it.
I think so.
You know, we don't want to get too caught up in legalities of who's right, who's wrong. So we're very appreciative that the city attorney is offering to help you have witnesses present that can speak to your case.
Well, specifically Mr. Thomas.
Mr. Thomas, I don't know, are there others?
Yes, sir. It was Eric Anderson. He's actually engineer for the city that attended the property. He looked at the property with Mike Thomas.
Eric Anderson.
Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Anderson.
I can also contact him. Again, of course, it depends on the date and availability.
Yeah.
So let's look at that now. You've requested a continuance to another date in order to provide
Yes.
your case, your response to what the city has presented today, and then the city attorney has asked that they be allowed to examine your witnesses and perhaps present what's called a rebuttal witness. So the effort here may be possible, may not be, but we're going to make the effort, is to find a date that works for you, Mr. Sharway, for the city, and for two witnesses that the city placed on its witness list, Mr. Mike Thomas and Mr. Eric Anderson. It might be a challenge to find that date, but we can begin to look for one. If you have any suggestions of how we go about that, I'm open to that.
A start-off date. I know that Ms. Claudia Newman and I have had contact about a potential date prior to this date, and it was August 3rd, which is a Wednesday. The only and I am available. I believe this room was available because I looked into that.
Mm-hmm.
My concern, of course, is I don't know if Mr. Thomas and Mr. Anderson are, but I can immediately tell the hearing examiner and Mr. Sharway if they are not.
Mm-hmm.
But at least a tentative date, Mrs. Newman, in fact, said she was available that date. So I know his attorney would.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
August 3rd? Okay.
And I believe that's a Wednesday. Is that correct? If it's not, then
I don't know. I'd like to look at my calendar. And
It is a Wednesday.
I have another issue with
Okay.
the city that I need to address,
Understood.
which as far as a contract. So we have some
Understood.
issues that are
Procedure.
clouds over that. So why don't we take a pause in the hearing record, and we can just stop that record now so that we can discuss available date. Continued until that date at 10 a.m. And we'd begin by allowing any additional cross-examination of city witnesses, and then
Okay.
calling of appellate witnesses, and then if you choose to present any rebuttal witnesses.
okay, and that does, and so
We're not,
cross.
I don't know if we're on the record yet. Are we? And I want to thank Tella for providing the service that she provides. She's done an incredible job, and it's been a pleasure to work with you. We, off the record, had decided that this hearing should be continued until August 3rd, 2016, at 10 a.m. in this hearing room, at which time the appellant, Mr. Sharway, with presence of legal counsel that he expects to have present at that time, can have his legal counsel cross-examine the city witnesses that presented information today. And then we'll have an opportunity to call the three witnesses that were identified by the appellant in his witness list. And that would include Mr. Gray, yourself, Mr. Sharway, and then a William Chang. In addition, the city has cooperatively stated they will help provide witnesses that were on their witness list that are not here today, but would try to make them available on August 3rd. And those in particular are two witnesses, Mr. Mike Thomas and Mr. Erickson. I believe consulting geotech engineer then to the city?
That's correct.
Okay. So we hope to secure those witnesses for you. I don't know, do you have subpoena power? Can you call them?
I'll call them.
You'll call them.
I'll
The city
phone them,
attorney has
sure.
certain persuasive powers.
I think the
that,
city's more persuasive than I am.
We're confident, though, that they can be present.
We will do our best efforts.
And I want to encourage, too, Mr. Charway, that you or your attorney, it's certainly appropriate and often very helpful to contact the other party's witnesses in advance of the hearing and to determine what Mr. Erickson or Mr. Thomas might say. That can help, too, in the hearing on August 3rd. And also, along those same lines, it sounds like Ms. Raitan and Ms. Newman have been in contact with each other, and if you find a way to resolve the case without me having to make a decision, that is certainly to be encouraged. I want you to understand that in this jurisdiction, a contested case hearing is for me to decide if the city's presented sufficient evidence to prove the allegations that are in the notice of violation. If so, there is no authority for any mitigation. If so, if the city's found to prove that the alleged violations have occurred, then it is obligatory. I have no choice but to impose fines and penalties. So the authority is really quite restricted for the hearing examiner here. You have other courses you can choose. There's something called mitigation. You still have the opportunity to pursue that. So that's something that your attorney might want to interact with the city attorney and find ways to resolve without me writing a formal decision. Does that all make sense to you, Mr. Charway?
Thank you.
Okay. Anything further that you wanted to bring up or discuss before we adjourn for the day?
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Dawn Raitan, do you have anything you'd like to bring up before we adjourn for the day?
Yes, thank you very much. The last thing I would have is that at the earlier onset when we were discussing the continuance, the hearing examiner referenced that the city would transcribe these proceedings at its own cost. My request is that we have these audio transcript available. The audio tapes available. It's also visual. It's not just listening. They can watch the hearing. Is that correct?
I had no idea.
The tape is visual, correct?
Yes, I'm actually recording both ways. The camera's shorted out in the middle around the hour mark, so I have only the audio of during that 5-minute time.
I see. Well, that's good to know.
So if we
I
can
never
have
knew
Ms.
that
Newman
before.
rely on that rather than
Certainly.
the expense of a transcript.
You understand? It's not to transcribe in writing, and really that's what I meant to reference earlier, is to make it available to your attorney. And I think that's almost instantaneous, so you can have that available.
Something we can ask for today or when we can get it?
Well,
And usually there's a link online. I can go online and look at them, but I'm going to defer to Tila, who's the expert on that question.
Did you want to request a CD or?
Yeah, CD would be good.
Okay, yeah, I can have that to you
Okay,
today.
Thank you.
good. So you'll have that this week.
Yeah, that's
maybe
good.
even today.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's good.
Yeah, and again, Tila's been very, very cooperative and easy to work
Okay.
with, so I think you'll
Thank
find
you.
the same as you work with her.
And that was it.
All right. Well, then, it's noon. I promised we'd be done at lunchtime, so we are now adjourned for the day to reconvene on August 3rd.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Mr. Sherwin.